All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Eleanor Ho, and for my Keystone, I am working on a journalistic piece on workers' rights during the pandemic. So I am completing this for my master's in journalism at the College of Communication. And so today I thought I would kind of walk you through what my findings are and kind of how my reporting process evolved over the semester. So one of the stories I covered was Piscinavisthesia, because I was originally working on this as an investigation into health and safety measures in Massachusetts for workers. So Piscinavisthesia is a worker-led group who kind of organizes around health and safety and other workers' rights issues in seafood processing in New Bedford, Massachusetts. So these workers were recognizing lots of issues with specifically with pandemic measures like paid sick leave, receiving PPE, being able to distance in the workplace. So what that led them to send a letter in April of 2020 to over 30 employers in the seafood processing industry. And though there was some success and some victories that they had with that, many of some of the employers were still not ensuring their safety completely, which led these members that you see here to send another letter in December asking again for these companies to, actually take care of the health and safety of their workers. Another big issue was for members of Piscinavisthesia, some who I've included their photos here. Many of them are immigrants, some from Guatemala, and many of them speak a language that is native to the area. At the time, a lot of the health and safety trainings were being conducted exclusively in English, which meant that a lot of these workers had no idea what they were supposed to do in terms of protecting themselves from COVID and from other workplace dangers. So when I started my reporting process, I spoke with some advocates to sort of get the lay of the land, figure out what the true issues are. And I spoke with Yesenia Faro, an organizer of the Chelsea Collaborative. And when it came to workplace safety, safety and health, she told me that she heard stories of employers like selling masks for way more than they're worth, crowded vans that didn't allow workers to distance, and just generally like really dangerous conditions where workers weren't being protected. Despite this, however, when I was looking into complaints, I found that in fact, most of these complaints weren't being reported at all. And the reason was what I learned from these advocates were that frequently like a long legal process is very unattractive to these workers. And they also face a lot of intimidation from their employers. And that can be range from, having your pay docked to being threatened to being fired. And for many immigrants, that of which we have many in the Massachusetts community, they can be even threatened with deportation. Another huge issue that led to many of these workplace safety issues to not be reported is, in fact, there was no one to complain to. So OSHA is supposed to be the federal entity that overlooks workplace safety. However, since the pandemic has began, they have not announced any enforcement standards in terms of, keeping workers safe, distanced, and protected from COVID-19 at work. So what does that really mean? So I spoke with Michael Felsen, who is a fellow at Justice at Work, which is a legal nonprofit. And he told me that there's a sizable gap between a recommendation to implement safety measures, which is what OSHA has issued thus far, and an enforceable rule mandating them. He said that when it's only a suggestion, employers concerned with their bottom line may opt to ignore or postpone. And when they do, these workers' lives are being put at risk, which is what we were seeing with the case of Piscinavisthesia workers. And so what does that mean in Massachusetts to not have those enforcement guidelines from OSHA? Well, without that, enforcement for health and safety has fallen to state and local entities. At the beginning of the pandemic, many of these entities weren't prepared to deal with these kinds of issues, so there was a huge scramble to try to figure out what to do. And so as you can see here, there's a huge list of various bodies in Massachusetts that have jurisdiction over health and safety, which led to a lot of confusion. Especially early in the pandemic, I also heard reports that some complaints weren't being inspected at all. Businesses were being asked and employers were being asked to self-report. And so unsurprisingly, in the first 6 months of the pandemic, only one workplace in Massachusetts was cited for safety violations. And through my reporting, though, my story began to change. I was originally looking at health and safety issues, but everybody that I was talking to was telling me the same thing over and over. And that summed up really well in this quote from Maura Healey, the Attorney General of Massachusetts. She told me that this pandemic has exposed some of the fragilities in the system. And that is, again, what I was hearing from tons of other advocates. There have been lots of concerns in terms of protecting workers from COVID, but the pandemic has also served to exacerbate a lot of the issues that workers already face when it comes to ensuring that their rights are being protected. And that has been very true in the case of Hoff's Bakery, workers at Hoff's Bakery in Malden, So prior to the pandemic, many of these workers were actually many who had been working there for over 10, some close to 15 years, were told to quit their jobs and to be rehired through a temporary staffing or through a staffing agency. So because these workers had been working there for so long and had a lot of trust in the business, they did so. However, following the initial pandemic shutdown in March, many of these workers did not get hired back. And that's despite the Hoff's Bakery and also the staffing agency that they were hired by receiving millions and millions of dollars in aid specifically for payroll during the pandemic. So this left these workers, many of who were women with children, in a very, very precarious financial situation at a crucial time. And in addition to this kind of firing, I heard reports of workers being forced to work under illegal names. And I heard reports of intimidation within Hoff's Bakery towards the workers that were still employed, and a whole host of other issues. And this, again, led to essentially these workers having to organize on their own. You can see on the pictures on the right, on the left, some of these workers did lead protests at Hoff's Bakery in an attempt to achieve justice. So this is just like an example of how in the pandemic, it's been really, really difficult for workers to leave a dangerous workplace because there have been so many, since unemployment has been such a huge issue. It's forced workers to stay in positions that have not been the safest for them, and it's enabled a lot of employers to, in some ways, take advantage of their workers. And again, we're seeing here workers being forced to organize on their own and not being able to receive any help from the entities that are supposed to be helping them. So again, some of my takeaways from my reporting, both in workplace safety and on the issue of workers' rights just in general. Workplace safety has been under-enforced in Massachusetts and across the country. So as a result, workers have often had to take action on their own to resolve any of these issues, like we saw with anesthesia, specifically with protecting themselves from COVID, and also with the workers from Hoff's Bakery who were facing a lot of issues just in general. Health and safety isn't the only issue, again, that needs attention. The pandemic has made it difficult for them, for workers to simply make a living during an already difficult time. And the pandemic has really enabled some employers to take advantage of this. And so this is like an ongoing story that I'm continuing to follow. There's a lot of interesting things in the works when it comes to Hoff's Bakery. But that kind of concludes what I've planned to share. So I'm happy to take any questions that you guys have.
That's terrific. Thank